that the PAC actually played quite a pivotal role 64 years ago, as they were at the forefront, rather, of this peaceful march. Of course, it was met with resistance from the apartheid police and the apartheid regime, of course, which then resulted in those 69 people being killed, and subsequently this day being called the Sharpeville Massacre Day. Earlier on, we just reflected in our earlier crossing that the UN had actually labeled this day as the International Day for Elimination of Racism and all forms of intolerance. But what was quite interesting, what we saw earlier on, Ayanda, is various leaders of various political parties and various ideologies putting their differences aside and coming here, paying tribute to those fallen heroes, those 69 fallen heroes. We saw not only PAC President Zwanele Nyonso, but we also saw ACT President Ace Magashule, the President of ActionSA, Mr. Herman Mashaba, ZAPO President Nalvis Kekema, and of course Ayanda Ali Payne, who is from Build One South Africa. But let me just quickly rope into this program, into our interview, the President of ActionSA, Mr. Mashaba. Mr. Mashaba, thank you so much for joining us. We are currently rushing off to the next program of the PAC, but just shortly, you came here, political differences aside, to pay tributes, to pay homage to those who lost their lives in the Sharpeville Massacre.
Well, thank you very much, and good morning to the listeners on this really very sad day where, as you say, many years ago, 1961, when 69 of our people were butchered. And this is the day South Africa calls Human Rights Day. But when you actually look at the lived experience of our people out there, people who actually enjoy human rights in this country today are those who are on the wrong side of the law. We live in a country where 86 of our people are being murdered, butchered every day, unleashed by this uncaring government, where every 11 minutes we have a woman raped in this country. We have our youth being destroyed by international drug cartels. But also for me, what I find it really very sad and deeply touching is to call this day Human Rights Day. We forget that this is the day when our people were murdered, were butchered. So I think as South Africans, we need to really reflect and revisit the 30 years of our democratic dispensation. Did it really bring us human rights? Unfortunately, some of us would really differ, and we can really give you evidence. Just really look at, as I said, how many women are being raped, how many people are being killed. 12 million of our own people are unemployed. You look at the living conditions of our people in squalor, in what they call informal settlement, which are squatter camps, where people's dignity are taken away from them because of the scourge of drugs. Our youth future is being destroyed, and in the process destroy our families and our way of lives. And we talk about human rights, and we look at the money being pumped in the so-called human rights lawyers fighting for criminals, not fighting for the rights of the victims. And that's something, honestly, as South Africans are going forward, let me take that when we drafted our constitution and our Bill of Rights, and when this day was declared as Human Rights Day, I think it's something that, honestly, we need to revisit as South Africans, because we need to recognize the role that the PAC members played on that day, because it is because of them that today we enjoy the kind of freedom that we're enjoying. But is it real freedom? I honestly don't really believe so.
Mr. Mashaba, I like the fact that you highlight the reality of some South Africans. That 30 years into democracy, after democracy, I mean, some people don't have service delivery, some don't have houses, some are living in utter poor conditions. The very gravesite that we're in right now is dilapidated, it's been neglected. But I mean, when we come to the families of the very victims that you're honoring right now, they put the blame at the doorstep of not only government but political parties to say that maybe a Herman Mashaba, another leader will only remember us on the 21st of March only. Besides that, there's nothing to show that, as leaders of political parties, as leaders of government, you actually care about them. And it's not only about the 21st of March. Do you go help these families, visit these families? What does ActionSA actually do for these families?
I think, Natasha and South Africans, we need to really be realistic. The kind of challenges this country is facing are massive. Let me just really give you an example of one case we're dealing with. 8 years ago, on the 5th of February 2016, three of our fellow South Africans, Yvonne Nisi, Pritin Kambule, and Solomon Jerende, collapsed in a container. This very same government is actually cooperating with the criminal elements that actually murdered those people. You know what happened in Marikani. We know human trafficking that's happening in our country. So I think it's really very difficult when you don't really have the support of government. As political party, we can only really do so much. No one can actually stop us from recognizing this day, making sure that we bring it to the attention of South Africans. But ultimately, it is the responsibility of the government, a democratic government, to ensure that our people live in dignity. No one human individual or a political party in opposition can do much. An opposition party in any way in a democratic dispensation, their role is to expose the rot that government does. And unfortunately, we are dismally failed by government. And if they are saying the responsibility lies with us as civil society, I can tell you right now, just 2 days ago, a family member, my wife's aunt, was murdered brutally at the age of 64 in one of the villages in Amanskraal. 17 months later, that person who murdered her and raped her, a 74-year-old, living on her own. 17 months later, it's only the time that this guy was sentenced to 20 years. The other one was released. But let me tell you something that is actually touching. My wife and I had a conflict to say something is not right. Because while the judge was actually reading the sentence, we discovered this guy is only 38 years old. And now my wife and I were saying, so that basically means that when this guy, when we voted for Nelson Mandela on the 27th of April, this guy was only 8 years old. This guy, part of the reading of the judgment, only went up to standard, did not even complete standard 6. Now we look at it as a family. We lost our aunt in a brutal manner, being raped by young men. But at the end of the day, you look at this boy, this means he was failed by the system. This corrupt government. This guy, 30 years later, at the age of 38, you can imagine, this guy is supposed to have been an accountant, an engineer, and so forth. Because that's why we fought apartheid. That's why people paid their lives in 1966, 61. But really look at 30 years down the line. So we are facing a myriad of challenges as a country. We can only fix this country if South Africans themselves can ensure that we remove this uncaring government. Come the 29th of May this year, honestly, South Africa deserves a better government, not the corrupt, unpatriotic government that has opened our borders to everyone to really come into our country. When our own people are suffering, they live in squalor.
Okay, Mr. Mashaba, thank you so much. I can see Ms. Ayanda Ali Payne. If I'll ask you, gentlemen, can you please just call her there? If you'll just quickly, Ayanda, please give me permission to actually get a reaction from her, as we're soliciting various views from various political parties. But of course, just a reminder to our viewers that this is an event of the PAC. They're actually going to the grave site, I beg your pardon, the memorial, the Sharpeville Memorial, and further from that, they'll be going to the nearby dam, where the main program will be, where they will be engaging, and giving their keynote speeches to the various attendees. Of course, I must just remind you that various other political party leaders, like Azapo President Mr. Nelvis Kgema, will be giving his, messages of support, as well as ACT President Mr. Ace Magashule. I just want to find out if they've actually managed to get her quickly. And of course, just a reminder to our viewers that these are various political parties that are actually commemorating, and remembering the victims who lost their lives there, in 1960. And I think, Ayanda, the overall message here from various political parties is that, yes, 30 years down, the line and into democracy, people are commemorating this day as Human Rights Day, but is there really any human rights to actually celebrate when people are complaining about potholes actually driving into this area where the very grave sites that we're at right now, are vandalized, where the municipality actually neglects this place, and the PAC actually is basically saying earlier on when I was speaking to Mr. Apapo that they themselves as PAC members actually come and, take care of this very grave site that we're at right now. I'm joined by Ms. Ayanda Ali Payne of Build One South Africa. Ayanda, you were also here as various political parties, putting your political differences aside, coming out here, remembering the victims, of that fateful day, the Sharpeville Massacre, 69 lives lost. But the families and some South Africans are basically saying that those lives were actually lost in vain.
We are in the democratic dispensation, but the massacres have not ceased. You can talk about the Marikana massacre. You can talk about Andries Tatane and how his blood was spilled while he was fighting for basic human rights. You fast forward to 2024, we find ourselves with no water. We find ourselves with no electricity. We find ourselves in a situation where as women, if you have to go out of your house to run, to jog, to take the kids to school, you wonder whether or not you'll come back home safely. So we look at human rights and we look at the violations that we are experiencing in this day and age, and we have to wonder ourselves if we have made such great strides or if we've just changed the label from the apartheid oppressor to a modern day oppressor. And I think it's a question that we need to ask ourselves as South Africans. The fact that you have black South Africans who remember the atrocities of apartheid but can utter the words apartheid being no, it was better under apartheid because at least we had 1, 2 and 3 things that they will list. I think that is a great travesty of justice. I think it's an indictment of where we are now. The fact that people who remember the horrors of the apartheid regime can still say with their mouths it was better that time than it is now. I think it is something that we need to reflect on as South Africans, but equally those of us who are at home, those of us who are in different sectors of society, private sector, civil society, I think it also is incumbent upon us to ask ourselves, what am I doing? Yes, we can point a finger to the government, we can point a finger to all manner of people, but what am I doing? Because when you point that one finger, several fingers are pointing back at you. So we're saying as Build One South Africa, it's time you arise, you stand up on your feet, make your voice heard, go out to vote, be active in your community. I love to see the community that we're in right now because they've put aside any of their regalias, their political affiliation, and they understand that the enemy is one. The enemy is injustice. The enemy is the human rights violations that we're seeing now. So I say, may that long live, may it spread to different communities, may we stand up and make our voices heard.
Ayana, you've partially answered my next question. Other people would say it's very easy for you to actually criticize, the current government. Others may even say that, listen, the current government has provided housing, has provided water, sanitation, electricity. As the opposition, it's very quick, like you say, to point a finger while 4 fingers are pointing back at you. For a person who's at home, yes, you've encouraged people to go out and vote for Busa, but what has Busa actually practically done in such communities like Sharpeville?
I love it. We always say as Build One South Africa, we're not a government in waiting, we're a government in working. We've not waited for a mandate, we've not waited for somebody to send us. We've taken it upon ourselves as community members to be active in our society. I can list the many water tanks that we've delivered to water scarce areas or areas where they have poor infrastructure that's not been maintained, and as a result people have been forced to drink water that is used by livestock. We've come in those communities and we've provided JoJo tanks. I can speak about how we've prepared young people for job readiness, how we help them to upskill themselves so that they are not only looking for employment but they make sure that they're employable. We can speak about our different political struggles, whether it is transformation in the legal fraternity, whether it is health sector, education. I myself can talk to you about Bukobami Youth Center, an organization in Dobsonville, Soweto. 9 years we've been running now, helping young people in that community to upskill themselves and be able to go into various sectors of society. Today, as we speak, they're going to Constitutional Hill because we want them to know what their constitutional rights are. We want them to be active participants in this community. And so we can list until the cows come home all the many things that we have done. And we're proud to say we will continue to work. The elections will find us while we're on the ground.
Okay, thank you so much for your time. Of course, various views from various leaders of political parties. We've just spoken to Ayanda here of Build One South Africa, of course, listing what they've done practically for the people of this area and to actually improve their basic, human rights, Ayanda, as we actually observe this very day. Like I mentioned before, that this is not the end of the program. We'll be heading to our next stop, which is the Sharpeville Memorial, and from there we'll be going to the dam where the main program will be, and we expect that the president of the PAC, Mr. Mzwanele Nyonso will be addressing attendees at 12. Of course, ACT President Ace Magashule and the President of AZAPO will also give their keynote speeches and addresses there.